I stayed alone in the house because it was mine now and because it made sense at the time. I inherited it after a relative passed, someone distant enough that the house came with more paperwork than emotion. It sat on a quiet street where most people kept to themselves. The place was older but solid, 2 stories with a narrow staircase and a layout that reflected a different way of living. I worked nights, so my schedule flipped the house on its head. I slept during the day and lived in the dark. The first few days felt fine, empty but manageable. I told myself the quiet was part of the adjustment. Houses made noise, especially ones that had been closed up. Pipes clicked when water cooled. Wood creaked when temperature changed. At night, those sounds felt louder because everything else was still. The noises came randomly at first. A thump from upstairs, a scrape near the stairs, a light tap behind a wall. Each one had a possible reason. I never felt watched. I just felt aware. After about a week, a pattern formed. I would come home from work around midnight, eat something small, and move through the house with the same habits every night. I turned off lights room by room as I went. 5 minutes after the last light went off, the noises started. Always 5 minutes. I checked the time enough to be sure. It was not exact to the second, but close enough that it stopped feeling like chance. The sounds were not the same every night. Sometimes it was footsteps upstairs. Sometimes it was a door shifting slightly on its hinges. Once it was the sound of something being dragged across the floor above me. What stayed consistent was the timing. I told myself it was coincidence. My brain was looking for patterns because I was tired and alone. Working nights does that. You lose reference points. You start measuring time and habits instead of hours. To test it, I changed my routine. One night, I left the lights on longer. I sat in the living room with every lamp off except one, scrolling on my phone. No sounds. I waited past the usual window. Still nothing. When I finally stood up and turned the lamp off, I counted in my head. Just over 4 minutes later, something moved upstairs. It was fast. A sudden rush of footsteps, like someone crossing a room quickly and then stopping. My chest tightened, but I stayed where I was. I did not go upstairs. I did not turn the lights back on. I waited until the house settled again. Over the next few nights, I changed things more. I turned off lights in different orders. I stayed in different rooms. I slept earlier, then later. The sounds adapted. They did not stop. They followed. If I turned the kitchen light off last, the noise came from near the kitchen. If I went upstairs before settling, the noise came from below. It always waited until I was awake and in the dark. It never happened when I slept during the day. I stopped using the upstairs entirely. I slept on a couch. The noises stayed above me. Footsteps crossing rooms. A door opening and closing slowly. The sound of weight shifting near the top of the stairs. I checked the house in daylight. Every room, every closet. The attic access was sealed shut with old paint. The basement door was locked and dusty. No signs of animals. No droppings. No chewed wood. Everything looked untouched. One night, I decided to do nothing. I came home, ate, and turned off the lights like usual. Then I sat perfectly still on the couch. I did not check my phone. I did not shift my weight. I controlled my breathing until my chest ached. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. Nothing happened. The house was silent in a way I had not experienced since moving in. No pipes, no creaks, no distant movement. It felt like the building itself was waiting. At some point, my legs went numb. I stood up without thinking, just enough to shake the feeling out of them. The moment my weight left the couch, something ran upstairs. It was not cautious. It was not controlled. It was fast and panicked, like someone caught off guard. Footsteps pounded across the second floor, from one end to the other, then stopped hard, like someone had slammed into a wall or dropped to the floor. I did not wait to hear more. I grabbed my keys and left the house with the lights still off. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. I never slept there again. In the following days, I hired a property inspector and a private security contractor. I told them everything without trying to make it sound reasonable. I let them think what they wanted. They found the answer where I had not thought to look. The house had been vacant for months before I inherited it. During that time, someone had been using it without permission, not living openly, using it carefully. They entered through a side access to the basement that had been hidden behind overgrown shrubs. From there, They could move through the house using the stairs and retreat back below before daylight. They were not there all the time. They watched patterns. They listened. My night schedule gave them cover. My lights told them when I was awake. The 5-minute delay was time to move without being seen, to test whether I would follow sounds or stay put. When I changed my routine, they adjusted because they were paying attention. When I stayed still, they stayed still. The moment I stood, they ran because they thought they had been discovered. Nothing supernatural happened in that house. No tricks of space or time. Just a person who learned my habits faster than I realized and used the structure of the place to stay hidden. I sold the house without stepping inside again. The paperwork was handled by others. The keys were mailed. I did not need to see the rooms one last time. I had already learned what it felt like to share space with someone who knew when you were awake and waited for the dark to move. I rented the house because it was cheap and because I wanted something small where I would not be reminded of my old life. The breakup left me tired in a quiet way. I did not want roommates. I did not want neighbors close enough to hear me move around. The listing showed a 1-story place on the edge of an older block, built low to the ground with a shallow crawl space instead of a basement. The rent was far lower than anything else in the area. I noticed that right away. I told myself the owner just wanted someone steady. I did not ask too many questions. The house smelled like old dust and cleaning spray when I moved in. The floors were thin laminate laid over older wood that creaked in spots. The walls were painted white, uneven in places like someone had done it themselves. The vents ran close to the floor, rectangular and narrow, meant to move air through the crawl space and up. One of those vents sat at the end of the hallway, right outside the bedroom. I noticed it because the metal was bent slightly inward. The first week passed without anything strange. I unpacked slowly. I slept better than I had in months. The neighborhood was quiet at night. Cars passed only a few times an hour. The house settled and popped as it cooled, but nothing unusual. I started to relax. I told myself the cheap rent was luck. On the 8th night, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed light spilling across the hallway floor. It was low and thin, coming from the vent near the baseboard. At first, I thought it was a reflection from bathroom. I turned the bathroom light off. The glow stayed. I crouched down and looked closer. The light was steady, white, and focused, like a flashlight beam pointed the wrong way. It was coming from inside the crawl space, shining out through the slats of the vent. I stood there trying to think of a reason. Maybe a work light left behind. Maybe wiring I did not understand. I did not own a flashlight that bright. I went to the breaker box in the laundry area and shut off every switch. The house went dark. The refrigerator stopped humming. The heater clicked off. The light in the vent stayed on. My mouth went dry. I stood there longer than made sense, watching it, hoping it would flicker or fade. It did not. I went back to the hallway and pressed my ear near the vent. I could hear nothing but the faint sound of air moving, like slow breathing, but I told myself that was the house equalizing temperature. I slept with all the lights on that night. I did not turn the breakers back on until morning. When I checked the vent in daylight, there was no light, just darkness behind bent metal. The next few days were tense, but quiet. I kept telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Old houses had odd wiring. Crawl spaces hid strange things. I kept busy and stayed out of the house as much as I could. At night, I listened harder than before. At 3:18 a.m. on the third night after the light, I woke up to a sound under the floor. It was not a scrape or an animal scuttle. It was a cough. Human, dry, controlled. Someone trying not to be loud and failing. I sat up in bed and held my breath. The sound came again, muted by wood and insulation, but clear enough that there was no mistaking it. It came from directly under the bedroom. I felt the mattress vibrate faintly, like someone shifting their weight below. I did not move until morning. When the sun came up, I left the house and called the police for my car. They arrived and searched the crawl space. They checked every access point and every vent. They found nothing. No bedding, no food, no wiring. The crawl space was empty except for dirt and old insulation. The officer told me there was no sign anyone had been there recently. No disturbed soil, no trash, no explanation. I want to believe that. I moved a chair in front of the bedroom vent anyway. I slept with my phone in my hand. The next 2 weeks passed without another sound. I started to feel embarrassed about my fear. Stress does strange things. Being alone after a breakup can warp perception. I told myself that over and over. One afternoon while cleaning, I pulled the bed away from the wall to vacuum. Under the bed, near the headboard, were food wrappers. A candy bar brand I did not buy. A protein bar I had never liked. The wrappers were flattened and tucked close to the wall, like someone had pushed them out of sight. I stood there staring at them until my legs felt weak. I knew I had not brought them into the house. I knew I did not eat in bed. I knew I vacuumed under there before. That night, I packed everything important. I stayed at a friend's place. The next day, I hired a private inspector who specialized in older homes. I paid extra for a full crawlspace evaluation. He found the answer the police did not. One section of the crawlspace wall had been cut and repaired poorly from the inside. The opening led to an old utility tunnel that connected to a storm drain system under the block. It was sealed enough to avoid casual notice, but loose enough to move. The vent in the hallway had been widened from behind, allowing light and sound through. Someone had been using the tunnel to access the crawl space without leaving surface tracks. The cough was from someone hiding, trying to stay still. The light was a headlamp. The house had been used before, not for ghosts or stories or anything dramatic. It had been used because it was cheap, ignored, and easy to enter. Someone knew it was empty before I moved in. Someone did not leave when I arrived. I broke the lease and left the city within a month. The owner never asked why. I never slept alone in a ground-level place again. Cheap rent is not a gift. Sometimes it is a warning that no one else wanted to find out why it was available. I stayed alone in my childhood home because it was easier than driving back and forth while sorting paperwork. My parents had already moved south. The house was empty except for furniture they did not want to take. Old couches, a dining table with one leg shimmed by folded cardboard, boxes stacked in rooms that used to be bedrooms. I told myself it would be fine for a few nights. I grew up there. I knew every sound the place made. I knew how the floors shifted with weather and how the pipes knocked in winter. The neighborhood was quiet and spread out. Long driveways, mature trees, houses owned by the same families for decades. Nothing ever happened there. The first evening felt strange in a flat way, not scary. The rooms echoed. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have. I kept lights off in rooms I was not using to save electricity, even though it did not matter anymore. I ate on the old kitchen counter because the dining table felt too big for one person. Before going upstairs, I locked every door without thinking. Front door, back door, side door near the garage. I checked them twice because that was how my parents did it. That routine stayed in my hands. I went to bed early. The room I slept in used to be mine, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me. The closet was empty. The walls were bare. The air smelled like dust and old paint. I lay awake longer than usual, listening to the house settle. At some point after midnight, I checked my phone. It was 1:40 a.m. A few minutes later, I heard the side door creak. It was a slow sound, like pressure easing, not a slam. It did not sound forced. I stayed still and waited for it to stop. It did. I told myself it was temperature change. The nights were colder than the days. That door had always been sensitive to it. I fell asleep again without getting up to check, mostly because I did not want to walk through the dark house alone. In the morning, sunlight filled the kitchen in a way I remembered from childhood. I made coffee and went outside to throw the grounds away. That was when I noticed the flower pot by the garage. It was tipped over. The dirt had spilled onto the concrete. Under it was the spare key my mom always kept there. We used to keep there. The key was gone. I stood there longer than I should have, holding the empty pot, feeling stupid for not checking it sooner. I thought about my parents leaving, loading their car, saying goodbye to neighbors. I convinced myself my mom had taken the key before they drove away. That made sense. It was responsible. She would not leave a spare key behind in an empty house. I told myself the pot must have fallen from wind or a raccoon. That explanation fit well enough. I spent the day inside going through file boxes, old tax records, insurance papers, utility bills going back years, receipts folded into envelopes. The work was boring and steady. It helped me stop thinking about the night before. By evening, I was tired and dull. I locked the doors again, more carefully this time. I checked the side door twice. The handle did not move. I went upstairs and put my phone on silent before bed because I did not want notifications waking me. Around the same time as the night before, I woke up without knowing why. The house was quiet, but the quiet felt thin. Then I heard movement downstairs. It was not footsteps. It was slower, a dragging sound, low and uneven, like something heavy being pulled across the floor without lifting it. It moved a short distance, paused, then moved again. Each sound was controlled. Nothing scraped loudly. Nothing hit a wall. It was careful. I sat up in bed and did not breathe. My room was dark except for the glow of the phone screen when I checked the time. Just after 1:40 a.m. again, I stayed still, listening. The sound continued, crossing the living room below. It was not random. It followed a straight path. I knew the layout of the house too well. I could trace it in my head. The dragging stopped directly under my bedroom. I stayed frozen, phone face down on a mattress so no light would show. I did not move. I did not check the door. I did not call anyone. I waited for another sound. None came. The house went silent in a way that felt intentional, like someone had stopped moving because they knew I was awake. I do not know how long I lay there. My body hurt from being tense. Eventually, my mind slipped into shallow sleep without permission. When I woke up, it was morning. The light outside was gray and flat. I got out of bed slowly and listened again. Nothing. I went downstairs. The living room looked the same. Furniture untouched. No marks on the floor. No signs of anything out of place. The kitchen was clean. I walked to the front door and noticed the lock. It was unlocked. I stood there with my hand on the knob, staring at it. I knew I locked it the night before. I remembered turning the deadbolt. I checked the other doors. The back door was locked. The side door was locked. Only the front door was openable. Nothing was stolen. No drawers were opened. No boxes moved. The house looked exactly as it had the night before. I went outside again, my chest tight, and checked the flower pot. The spare key was back under it. It was placed neatly. The pot was upright. The dirt was smoothed down like someone had pressed it with their palm. I did not pack slowly. I threw my things into a bag and loaded my car without finishing the paperwork. Before leaving, I walked through the house one last time, not to check for damage, but to look for signs I missed. That was when I noticed the scuff marks near the base of the stairs. Very faint, long and shallow, as if something heavy had been slid and then pushed back. In the hallway closet, behind coats no one wore anymore, I found an old folded tarp. I did not remember it being there. Under was a small dolly, the kind used to move appliances. Dusty, wheels clean. Later that day, I went through the paperwork at a cafe instead of the house. In an old folder labeled repairs, I found a receipt from years back. A local handyman service. Emergency access copy made for side door. I remembered then, after a lock jammed once, my parents had given a key to a man who lived a few houses down, someone who helped with yard work and repairs when I was a kid. He moved away years ago, or I thought he did. I looked up the property records that afternoon. The house next door was no longer owned by the family I remembered. It had been sold months earlier. The new owner's name matched the receipt. I understood then what happened. Someone still believed they had access. Someone tested the house after my parents left, using the spare key, checking if anyone was staying there. The dragging sound was the dolly being moved, then pushed back when they realized I was upstairs. The door unlocked was not a mistake. It was a message. The key returned meant they wanted the option again. I never stayed there alone after that. The house sold quickly. I made sure the locks were changed before the listing went live. I did not tell my parents every detail. They would not have slept. I know now that the fear was not the house or the night sounds. It was the quiet certainty that someone knew the place as well as I did, and had been waiting for it to be empty again. I house sat my uncle's place because he trusted me and because no one else wanted to stay that far out in winter. He worked a pipeline job several hours away and needed someone to keep an eye on the house, feed the generator, and make sure the pipes did not freeze. The place sat alone at the edge of a wide stretch of state land. Trees pressed in on three sides. The road that led to it was plowed once every few days if the weather allowed. Snow covered everything. No neighbors for miles. At night, the dark felt solid, like it had weight. The first day was quiet in a way that felt clean. Snow muffled every sound. The house was built low and long, with a metal roof and narrow windows meant to keep heat in. I spent the afternoon hauling firewood from the shed and checking the fuel level on the generator. The cold bit through gloves fast. The air smelled sharp and empty. I remember thinking that the silence was the loudest thing there. After dinner, I sat in the living room with one lamp on. Outside the windows were black mirrors. Snow reflected faint starlight, but beyond that was nothing. At 11:22 p.m., I glanced toward the back window without any reason and saw someone standing at the edge of the trees. They were tall, still, just a darker shape against darker trunks. No movement at all. I felt my body react before my mind did. My stomach dropped. My chest tightened. I stood slowly and leaned closer to the glass. The figure did not move. I told myself it was a hunter or someone snowshoeing through the land. That area allowed it. People cut across property lines all the time in winter. I turned off the light so the window would stop reflecting my own shape and waited. Nothing changed. The figure stayed where it was. I backed away and sat down again, forcing myself to breathe evenly. After a while, I stopped looking. When I checked again later, the trees were empty. I slept badly that night. Every sound felt too clear. The heater cycling on and off. The tick of metal as the roof cooled. In the morning, the world outside was bright and clean. New snow had fallen overnight. I put on boots and a jacket and walked the yard to calm myself. I expected to see tracks. Someone had been standing there. Fresh snow should have shown something. There were no footprints. None near the trees. None leading toward or away from the house. The snow was smooth except for my own marks spreading out from the porch. I walked farther back, checking the tree line where I'd seen the figure. Nothing. No broken crust. No compressed patches. It was as if no one had been there at all. I told myself I misjudged distance or shape. Snow and shadow played tricks on the eyes. I spent the day doing chores and stayed busy. I kept the radio on low so the house would not feel so empty. When evening came, I locked the doors early. I closed the curtains in the bedroom, but left a gap for light from the snow. I did not want to feel sealed in. Sometime during the night, I woke up because something felt wrong. I lay still and listened. The sound came from outside my bedroom window. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Not rushed. Not strained. Just steady air moving in and out. I did not look. I stared at the wall and held myself still. The window was only a few feet from the ground outside. I could picture someone standing there, close enough for their breath to fog the glass. The sound stayed for longer than felt possible. Then it stopped. I did not move until morning. At sunrise, pale light filled the room. I sat up and turned toward the window. There were handprints on the glass. They were placed flat, fingers spread, as if someone had leaned in and pressed their weight forward. The marks were faint but clear. No fingerprints, just the shape of hands, defined by moisture and heat. The glass was clean otherwise. I stood there a long time, staring at them, trying to understand what I was seeing. I went outside again. The snow was untouched. No footprints under the window. No signs of someone standing there long enough to leave breath on the glass. The air was cold enough that any uncovered skin would have burned. I walked the perimeter of the house, checking each wall. Nothing. I left that afternoon. I told my uncle I needed to head back for work and that I could not stay the full stretch. He understood. I did not tell him everything. I did not want him to think I was overreacting. He had lived there for years without trouble. Weeks later, after he returned, he called me to ask about a few things I left behind. While we talked, he mentioned something that made the pieces line up. A man had been camping on state land nearby for part of the winter. Someone who moved around, kept to himself, used snowshoes to travel off trail. Local rangers had been trying to track him because he was suspected of breaking into empty seasonal cabins. He wore insulated gloves at all times because of frostbite damage. He knew how to avoid leaving tracks by stepping on packed drifts or following animal paths. He waited for lights to turn off before approaching houses. The handprints made sense then. Gloves pressed flat against warm glass. No fingerprints because there were none to leave. The breathing came from someone standing close enough to feel heat, but careful enough not to touch the ground beneath the window. The figure at the trees was someone watching, waiting to see if the house was empty. Nothing supernatural happened there. No tricks, no vanishing. Just a person who knew the land and knew winter well enough to move through it without being seen. I was alone in a place where someone else had already decided to be close. I do not house at remote places anymore. Snow hides too much, and silence can mean someone is listening. I stayed alone in my sister's house because someone needed to be there while she was hospitalized, and I was the closest family with a flexible schedule. She had gone in suddenly, earlier than expected, and the place still felt half prepared for a baby that had not come home yet. The house was quiet in a careful way, like it was holding its breath. I slept in the guest room downstairs because the upstairs felt too personal, filled with her things and plans that were paused. The baby monitor was still plugged in upstairs. I noticed it the first night when I was turning off lights. The receiver sat on the kitchen counter, angled toward the hallway. Its screen dim but active. I thought about unplugging it then, but felt wrong, like touching something she had left running on purpose. I left it where it was. The first night passed without trouble. The second night, the monitor crackled. It was not loud, just a soft burst of static that cut through the quiet. I looked up from the couch, heart kicking once, then settling. Old electronics did that sometimes. I went back to reading. Then I heard footsteps through the monitor. Not baby sounds, not random noise, clear adult movement. A step, then another with weight behind it. It sounded like someone crossing a room slowly, shoes brushing concrete. The sound did not match the house around me. The upstairs floors were wood. They creaked in familiar places. This was flat and dull, like sound swallowed by walls. I stood and stared at the monitor. The screen flickered and brightened. It did not show the nursery. It showed a dark space I did not recognize. Gray concrete walls, thick pipes running along the ceiling, moisture staining the corners. The camera angle was low, tilted slightly upward, like it had been placed on the floor or mounted badly. Breathing filled the speaker, close to the mic, slow and steady. I did not move for a long moment. My brain tried to place the image somewhere in the house. There was no basement access that I knew of. My sister had mentioned once that the house had a crawl space, nothing more. This was not a crawl space. The walls were poured concrete. The pipes were large. The breathing continued. The footsteps stopped. I unplugged the monitor from the wall. The screen went black. The kitchen felt suddenly too quiet, like I had shut off the wrong thing. I checked the doors and windows, even though I already knew they were locked. I did not sleep much after that. Every sound made my shoulders tense. The house stayed still. At 2:11 a.m., the monitor turned back on. The screen lit up on the counter, pale and steady. The same concrete room filled the display. The breathing was closer now, louder through the small speaker. I stood at the end of the hallway and watched it like it might move on its own. I had unplugged it. I knew I had. The cord was still lying loose on the counter, not connected to anything. I did not touch it again. I sat on the couch until morning with all the lights on. In daylight, the house felt less threatening, but more confusing. I went through every room. I checked the closets, the laundry area, the garage. There was no door I had missed. No hatch. No sign of anyone else. The monitor sat dead on the counter, silent now, screen dark. Later that morning, I went through old paperwork my sister kept in a kitchen drawer, looking for insurance information she had asked me to find. That was when I saw the report. Folded once, yellowed at the edges. It was a police summary from years earlier, before she bought the house. It mentioned a break-in incident. Someone had been living in the basement space of the house when it was vacant, accessing it through an exterior entry hidden by a shed. The basement had been sealed after, filled in partially, and the exterior access removed. The report noted that utilities still ran through the space and could not be fully disconnected without major work. I sat at the table and read it twice. The description of the basement matched what I saw on the monitor. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, limited clearance. It explained why the image did not match the rest of the house. It also explained why my sister never mentioned it. To her, it was a resolved problem from before she moved in. That afternoon, I called the baby monitor manufacturer and looked up the model online. The system used paired cameras and receivers, but the signal could drift if another camera was on the same frequency. It also had a backup battery in the receiver that would power it on if it detected a paired camera nearby. Unplugging it did not disable that feature. It only cut wall power. That night, I did not stay in the house. I slept in my car outside the hospital, close enough to check on my sister in the morning. The next day, I contacted the property management company that handled maintenance before my sister bought the place. After some pushing, they admitted that the basement ceiling was incomplete. It had been filled and closed off from inside the house, but utility access panels remained. Someone with knowledge of the layout could still enter from the storm drain easement behind the property. The breathing on the monitor was real. The footsteps were real. Someone was down there again, using a sealed space that everyone assumed was gone. The baby monitor camera had been left upstairs, but the receiver had picked up a signal from another camera, one that had been placed in the basement long ago and never removed, or one that had been placed there recently. The house was cleared later that week. Maintenance found signs of recent use in the basement space. Food wrappers, a sleeping pad, a portable battery pack. Whoever had been there left before they arrived. They sealed the remaining access points properly this time. The utilities were rerouted. The space was finally closed. I did not stay in the house again after that. When my sister came home with her baby, she moved in with our parents until the work was finished. She never asked for details. I never offered them. The monitor was thrown away. What stays with me is not the sound or the image. It is the moment I realized the house had been occupied in a way that did not touch the rooms I walked through. Someone had been there the whole time, separated by concrete and pipes, close enough for a device meant to watch a baby to pick up their breath in the dark. I stayed at my grandfather's cabin because it was quiet and because I needed to finish schoolwork without distractions. The place sat deep in state land, down a rutted dirt road that narrowed the farther you went. Pines closed in on both sides. The cabin was old, one room with a small bedroom off the back and a bathroom added later. No cell service unless you stood in one exact spot near the porch. No electricity after midnight because the generator was on a timer to save fuel. That was how my grandfather liked it. He said nights were for sleeping, not noise. The first evening felt calm in a heavy way. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I worked at the table until the generator clicked off and the lights died. The cabin dropped into darkness fast. I lit a lantern and finished reading in bed. Wind moved through the trees, but did not touch the cabin much. The door was solid wood, swollen from years of weather. The lock was old but firm. At exactly 12:03 a.m., someone knocked once on the door. It was slow and deliberate. Not a rap, not an accident. Knuckles on wood with enough pressure to be felt through the floor. I sat up in bed and listened. My body went cold, but my mind stayed oddly clear. I waited for a second knock. It did not come. No footsteps, no voice, just the wind again moving higher up the trees. I did not get up to check. I stayed still until morning. At sunrise, I went outside. The ground around the cabin was covered in old snow crusted hard from freeze and thaw. If someone had walked up to the door, there should have been marks. There were none. No damage to the door. No sign anyone had been there. I told myself it could have been a branch or ice shifting, though the sound had been too clean for that. I worked through the day and tried not to think about the night. When dark came again, I locked the door early. I checked the windows twice. I felt foolish doing it, but the feeling did not go away. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the knock came again. Same pressure, same place. One knock, nothing else. I never answered. I did not move. I sat on the bed with the lantern off, staring at the darker square where the door was. I counted my breaths until my chest hurt. When nothing else happened, I lay down and waited for sleep that did not come. The next morning, the ground looked the same. Wind had smoothed the crust even more. Still no tracks. I walked the tree line. Nothing felt disturbed. I started to believe someone was testing the cabin, checking if anyone was inside, knocking once to listen for movement. That idea made more sense than anything else. On the third night, I packed my bag and decided to leave early in the morning. I did not want another night there, but I also did not want to drive the road in the dark. I locked the door and sat on the bed, fully dressed, lantern beside me. At 12:03 a.m., the knock came from inside the cabin. It came from a short hallway that led to the bathroom. Wood on wood, the same slow pressure. One knock. Every thought in my head stopped at once. The sound was too close. It was not the door. It was the thin wall panel near the bathroom, the one that covered the plumbing access. I stood without thinking and backed into the corner, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped the lantern. I listened for breathing. I listened for movement. There was none. I did not sleep. When daylight came, I left the cabin with my bag and did not look back. I drove straight to town and called my grandfather from a payphone because my cell still had no service. I told him everything in a flat rush, leaving nothing out. He did not sound surprised. He told me the cabin had a service crawl behind the bathroom wall, not under the floor, but along the back, where pipes ran to keep them from freezing. Years ago, before the land around it was protected, people used the cabin in winter when it was empty. One man had been found living there without permission, entering during the day and hiding in the service space at night. After that, my grandfather added the generator timer and stopped staying there alone. The knock made sense then. Someone had been inside before midnight, hidden in a space I did not know existed. They knocked once to check if the cabin was empty, listening for movement or light. The lack of tracks was because they never approached from outside at night. The third knock came from inside because they were already there and thought I had gone to sleep. I reported it to the ranger station. They found signs of recent use behind the wall panel. Food wrappers, a sleeping pad folded tight. The person was gone by the time anyone checked. I never stayed at the cabin alone again. I finished my work somewhere loud and bright. What stayed with me was not the knock itself, but the patience behind it. Someone had been close enough to hear my breathing, waiting for the cabin to go dark, certain that silence meant permission. My roommate left town for a week to visit family, and the apartment felt different the moment he walked out the door. The place was not large. One floor, narrow hallway, kitchen tucked to the left, living room straight ahead, bedrooms on opposite sides. It was old construction, part of a block of similar units built decades earlier. Thin walls, floors that carried sound. I had lived there long enough to know the normal noises, the way the building breathed at night. That week, the quiet felt stretched. Jonah stayed one night because I did not want to be alone the first weekend. He crashed on the couch with a blanket and left his shoes by the armrest like always. We stayed up late watching nothing important, then turned the lights off one by one. I went to bed around midnight. Jonah stayed up a bit longer scrolling on his phone. I remember hearing the fridge open and close before everything settled. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. because of pacing. Not fast steps, slow, uneven movement across the kitchen floor. Back and forth. A few steps, pause, turn, repeat. It sounded barefoot. The fridge motor hummed underneath it. I lay still, listening, half awake. I assumed Jonah had gotten up for water or food. He had a habit of wandering when he could not sleep. I waited for the sound to stop. It did not. The pacing continued in a narrow line, never crossing into the living room. I checked my phone. Just after 2 a.m., I sent Jonah a text asking if he was up. The message showed delivered. No response. I lay there another minute, then another. The pacing slowed, then stopped. I heard the fridge door open. The seal made that soft release sound I knew well. I pushed myself out of bed, more annoyed than scared, and stepped into the hallway. The kitchen light was off, but the fridge cast a pale glow across the floor. Someone was crouched in front of it. The shape was wrong. The arms were too long, hanging past where knees should have been. The shoulders sloped in a way that did not match Jonah's build. The person was not sitting or kneeling. They were balanced low, weight forward, like they were ready to move. The fridge light outlined their back and elbows. I could not see their face. I stood frozen, one hand on the wall. My mind tried to force the image into something familiar. Jonah wearing a jacket. Jonah hunched awkwardly. Jonah playing a stupid joke. None of it fit. The person turned slowly. They did not stand. Their head lifted just enough to show a profile that was too flat in the light, like the face was angled away on purpose. The movement was controlled, careful, as if they were aware of exactly how much noise each shift would make. I stepped back without meaning to. My heel brushed the carpet. The sound was small, but it was enough. The person stopped turning. I shut my door and locked it. The click of the lock sounded too loud in my ears. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. I pressed my shoulder to the wall that separated my room from the living area and hit it hard enough to wake Jonah. I felt the impact through my arm. I did it again, then again, until my shoulder ached. The apartment went quiet. No pacing, no fridge, no movement at all. I stood there for a long time, listening for anything. I did not hear footsteps retreating. I did not hear a door open or close. The silence felt held in place, like someone was choosing not to move. Eventually, I heard Jonah shift on the couch. He coughed once and rolled over. He did not get up. He did not react to the noise I had made. I stayed awake until morning with my light on and my phone in my hand. When daylight came, the apartment looked normal again. Too normal. The fridge door was open. The light inside burned steadily. The milk sat on the shelf, warm. Nothing else looked disturbed. Jonah's shoes were still by the couch, exactly where he left them. He said he slept through the night. He had not been in the kitchen. He had not heard pacing. He had not heard me hitting the wall. We searched the apartment. Closets, bathroom, behind a shower curtain, under the sink. Nothing. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. There was no sign anyone else had been there. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Over the next few days, small things started to add up. Food went missing in ways that did not make sense. Bread clips left on the counter. Cabinets open just enough to notice. The fridge door found ajar more than once. At night, the apartment sounded busier than it should have been. Soft shifts in the walls. Weight settling where no one was. We started sleeping with our doors locked. Jonah left early one morning and did not come back that night. I did not blame him. I barely slept. The explanation came by accident. The building manager sent a notice about upcoming pipe work and inspections. It mentioned access panels behind kitchen units and older crawl routes connecting several apartments. Routes that were sealed but not fully removed during renovations years ago. The notice was meant to reassure tenants. It did the opposite. I pulled the fridge out from the wall. Behind it, low and partially hidden by a warped panel, was a section of drywall that had been cut and patched poorly. The screws did not match the rest of the wall. The edges were worn smooth, not from age, but from contact. Inside was a narrow service space that ran behind the kitchens. Not tall enough to stand, wide enough to crawl. It connected to the neighboring units through similar panels. Old wiring ran along one side. The smell inside was stale and human. That was where the arms came from. The crouch, the wrong shoulders. Someone moving low through a space never meant for people, carrying a backpack that pulled their posture forward, arms hanging longer because they were bracing on the floor. Someone used to staying hidden, used to moving only when they thought everyone was asleep. The pacing was them waiting. The turning was them deciding whether to move or freeze. We reported everything. The manager sealed the access properly this time. They said nothing about who might have been using it. They did not need to. We moved out early, broke the lease, left furniture behind. I did not go back alone. When I think about that night, what stays with me is not the shape I saw or the way it moved. It is how easily someone fit into the space between rooms, close enough to hear us breathe, patient enough to wait until the lights went out. I stayed alone during lockdown because there was no other option. My job went remote overnight. My friends scattered back to family homes, and travel stopped feeling casual. My apartment became the only place I existed. It was a narrow one-bedroom on the third floor of an older building, built long before anyone cared about clean lines or open layouts. The hallway ran straight from the bedroom to the bathroom, about 8 meters by memory. I walked it dozens of times a day without thinking. My routine never changed. I woke up at the same time, worked at the same small desk, cooked the same meals, went to bed at the same hour. At night, I turned off the living room light, walked down the hallway, used the bathroom, and went back to bed. It became automatic. I could have done it with my eyes closed. One evening, about 3 weeks into lockdown, I walked from my bedroom to the bathroom and reached the door faster than normal. It was subtle, just a feeling that my foot hit tile sooner than expected. I stopped inside the bathroom and stood there, confused, trying to place what felt wrong. I told myself I had just walked faster without noticing. Stress made time feel strange. I brushed my teeth and went back to bed. The next night, the hallway felt longer. I stepped out of my bedroom and walked, waiting for the bathroom door to appear where it always did. It took more steps. I slowed, then stopped, counting in my head. When I reached the door, my count was off by 3. I stood there staring at the frame, my heart beating harder than it should have. The hallway looked the same. Same scuff paint, same small crack near the baseboard. Nothing had moved. The next day, I counted again in daylight. From the bedroom door to the bathroom door took 12 steps. That had always been the number. That night, it took 10. I started paying attention after that. I counted every time. Sometimes it was 11, sometimes 13. Once it was 9. The changes were never extreme, but they were enough to notice. Enough to make my skin prickle when I walked it in the dark. I measured the hallway with a tape measure. The length did not change. The walls were straight. The ceiling was flat. I pressed my palms against the drywall, half expecting it to flex or shift. It felt solid. At night, new sounds started. When I walked down the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes. Not the soft delay you get in an empty space. These steps matched my pace exactly. When I slowed, they slowed. When I stopped, they stopped. I tested it. I took one step forward and froze. Silence. I took another, slower. The sound came again, perfectly aligned, like my movement had a shadow. I turned around once, fast enough to make myself dizzy. The hallway was empty. Sleep became shallow. I woke often listening. The building had normal noises, pipes ticking, someone closing a door 2 floors down, but underneath it all was the sense of something measuring space differently than I was. As if the apartment was being used in a way I could not see. I called maintenance after a week of this. They checked for loose boards, settling, structural issues. They found nothing wrong. The hallway measured the same every time they checked. They told me stress could do strange things to perception. Lockdown was hard on everyone. I want to believe them. The sounds did not stop. Some nights, I heard walking when I lay still in bed. Soft, deliberate steps moving above me. Not on the floor, but closer, like weight shifting just out of sight. I told myself it was pipes. I told myself it was imagination feeding on repetition. One morning, I woke with a stiff neck and noticed dust on my pillow that had not been there the night before. Fine white dust like drywall powder. I brushed it off and forgot about it until it happened again 2 nights later. The third time I looked up. Above my bed, on the ceiling, were fingerprints. They were faint but clear enough to see. 5 on one hand, 4 on the other, pressed into the thin layer of dust that clung to the paint. They were positioned as if someone had braced themselves there, palms flat, fingers spread, directly over where my head rested. I did not touch them. I stood on the bed and looked closer. The prints were too large to be mine. The spacing suggested someone hanging or crawling above the ceiling, pressing down to hold their weight. That was when everything clicked. The building was old. The ceilings were not solid slabs. There was a crawl space between floors, used for wiring and pipes. Narrow, unfinished, and connected across units. I had seen the access panel once in the hallway closet and never thought about it again. The hallway did not change length. My perception did. Someone above, it was moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped, using sound and pressure to map my position. The shifting step counts came from my own hesitation, my body adjusting pace without me realizing, reacting to sounds that were not coming from the floor at all. The compressed feeling came from fear tightening my stride. The stretched feeling came from anticipation slowing it down. The fingerprints meant someone had been directly above me while I slept. I did not stay another night. I packed essentials and left before sunset. Later, after reports and inspections, they found signs of someone using the crawl space. Food packaging, a sleeping bag pulled thin, boards worn smooth from repeated contact. The person had been entering through an unsecured roof access and moving between units during lockdown, when everyone was home but isolated enough to ignore small sounds. I moved out for good. Lockdown ended months later, but the routine never returned. I still count steps, sometimes without meaning to. Space feels less reliable than it used to. I learned that being alone does not always mean being by yourself, and that repetition can hide things moving just out of view, matching you, waiting for you to stop. We stayed at my cousin's house because it was empty and because it felt easier than paying for a place while we figured out next steps. The sale paperwork was moving slowly, and the house sat in that quiet gap between being lived in and being handed over. 3 of us slept there. I took the back bedroom. The others took the front and the couch. The house was older but well kept, a single story with a shallow roof and no attic access that we knew of. The walls were thick. The floors were original hardwood. The air smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. The first night was normal. Too normal, maybe. We cooked, watched something on a laptop, and went to sleep early. The neighborhood was quiet. No traffic, no late noise. I remember thinking the house felt empty in a peaceful way, like it was waiting. The second night started the same. We settled in, lights low, doors locked. Sometime after midnight, scratching started in the walls. At first, it was easy to ignore. Old houses made sounds. Pipes shifted, wood expanded. This was different. The scratching was rhythmic, not random scurrying, not claws scraping in panic. It came in short bursts, evenly spaced, like someone dragging something back and forth just out of sight. It moved along the wall between the bathroom and the hall, then paused, then continued again. We lay there listening, each of us awake without saying it. The sound went on long enough that time stretched. It did not speed up. It did not slow down. It stayed controlled. Then we heard something drop into the bathtub. The sound was heavy, solid, followed by a wet slap and a dull echo that filled the bathroom. Not the sound of debris falling, not the sound of something small. It sounded like weight hitting porcelain, then settling. We got up together and turned on the bathroom light. The tub was empty. The curtain was still. The drain was clear. There was no water running, but the tub floor was wet, as if something damp had been there and then removed. The smell in the room had changed. It was earthy and sharp, like soil mixed with cold water. We checked above the bathroom. There was no attic access, no hatch, no crawl door. The ceiling was solid plaster. We pressed on it. It did not flex. There were no stains or cracks that looked new. The scratching started again once we stepped away. We searched the rest of the house. Closets, cabinets, the garage. Nothing. No animals. No nests. No gaps big enough for something large to move through. The scratching continued, steady and patient, moving from wall to wall like it was following the layout of the house. By 4 a.m., the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It felt intentional, like something had finished what it was doing. We stood in the hallway, listening for any sign it would start again. Instead, we heard footsteps. They were bare, slow, each step placed carefully on the wood. Not heavy, but not light either. The sound moved down the hallway toward us, stopped, then shifted direction, as if whoever was walking was testing the floor with their weight. No one spoke. We did not need to. We moved together, backs to each other, eyes on the dark end of the hall. The footsteps stopped just out of sight, near the bathroom. We did not wait. We left together without grabbing our bags. Shoes stayed by the door. Phones were in our hands. We did not turn lights off. We did not look back. Later that morning, after daylight, we came back with the realtor and a maintenance worker. The house looked untouched. The bathroom tub was dry. No smell, no marks. The walls were opened in one section near the bathroom where the scratching had been loudest. Behind the wall was a narrow service void that ran along the plumbing. It was not meant for access, but it connected to an older storm drain line beneath the foundation. The cover on that access point had been loosened from below. Someone had been using it. They found a soaked jacket stuffed behind a pipe. Mud tracked along the concrete. The wet sound in the tub came from someone lowering themselves through a maintenance opening meant for pipes, slipping, and catching their weight on the tub edge before dropping inside to clean themselves off. The scratching was them moving along the narrow space, bracing with hands and feet, pulling themselves forward inch by inch. The rhythm came from effort, not randomness. The footsteps were real, bare feet on wood. Someone who thought the house was empty until it was not. Police later confirmed that someone had been living in the drainage system under several houses in the area, entering empty properties at night to wash, warm up, and sleep in walls where no one would look. The house had been empty long enough to become familiar. Our second night interrupted a routine that had gone on without resistance. We never stayed there again. The house sold soon after. Our bags were collected in daylight, in silence. What stays with me is not the fear itself, but how close we were to dismissing it. How easy it was to tell ourselves it was nothing until it was footsteps, slow and bare, moving where they should not have been. I had the house to myself for the first time in years because my wife took the kids to visit her sister for a week. The house sat on a quiet street with long gaps between porch lights, the kind of place where sounds traveled far at night. I worked from home and rarely noticed the hours passing. That week slowed everything. Without other people moving around, every noise landed heavier. The first night felt calm. I cooked late, cleaned the kitchen, checked the doors, and locked the windows the way I always did. I turned off the downstairs lights one by one and left a lamp on in the living room. The house settled. Pipes clicked. The fridge hummed. Wind pressed against the siding. I slept fine. The second night carried a different tone. I noticed it while brushing my teeth. The bathroom fan rattled longer than usual after I shut it off. I checked the hallway and stood still. The house breathed around me. I felt watched without seeing anything. I told myself the feeling came from being alone. I went to bed. Around midnight, I woke to a sound that did not belong to the house. It came from downstairs, soft and brief, like a shoe sliding across tile. I stayed still. I listened. Nothing followed. I waited until my pulse slowed. I told myself it could be the ice maker or a branch tapping glass. I slept again. The third day passed quietly. I worked, answered emails, ate a late lunch, and forgot about the sound. At dusk, I stepped outside to take the trash to the curb. The air felt cold and dry. I noticed my side gate stood open. I always kept it latched because the wind slammed it against the fence. I closed it and told myself I must have left it that way. That night, I stayed up later. I watched a movie with the volume low. I kept the lamp on. I locked the back door and checked the deadbolt twice. When I turned off the TV, the silence felt thick. I walked through the house and checked the windows again. Everything looked normal. I went to bed and lay awake. The house made small sounds as it cooled. Then I heard a new sound. It came from the laundry room near the back door. It sounded like fingers brushing cardboard. I held my breath. The sound stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. I heard it again, closer this time, like something being moved a few inches at a time. I did not get up. I stayed in bed and listened until the sound faded. I slept poorly and woke early with a dry mouth and a headache. The next morning, I found the laundry room light on. I never left it on. The cardboard box that held spare cleaning supplies had been nudged away from a wall. Nothing inside looked missing. The back door stayed locked. The window above the sink was shut. I stood there longer than needed and tried to line up the facts. I failed. I worked through the day with the door to my office closed. I kept my phone charged. I checked the house again before sunset. I found nothing else out of place. I ate dinner standing at the counter. I kept the lights on downstairs. That night, I heard footsteps. They came from the living room. Slow steps, spaced evenly like someone pacing. I lay still and counted them. They moved from the couch area toward the hallway and stopped near the stairs. I waited. The steps did not continue. I stayed in bed until the house fell silent. I did not sleep after that. When dawn came, I walked the house. I found the couch cushion pressed down as if someone had sat there. The front doors stayed locked. The windows were closed. The alarm panel by the door showed no alerts. I felt stupid for not calling someone. I felt worse for not knowing what to say. I spent that day restless. I checked online forums about houses making noises. I read about thermal expansion and animals in walls. None of it fit. At dusk, I noticed the side gate open again. The latch hung loose. The wind had been calm all day. I closed it and added a temporary tie. I checked the fence line. I found a footprint in the dirt near the back corner, deep at the heel. It looked fresh. I stared at it until the shape burned into my head. That night, I kept all the lights on. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. My phone rested in my hand. Around midnight, I heard the back door handle move. It turned slowly and stopped. The deadbolt held. I felt cold spread across my arms. I did not move. The handle turned again, harder. It stopped. I waited. After a long pause, I heard a soft thud against the door, like a shoulder testing it. I stayed silent. Minutes passed. The pressure eased. I heard steps retreat across the patio. I stayed at the table until morning. At first light, I went outside. I found fresh scuff marks on the patio near the door. I found a tie on the gate cut clean through. I found another footprint near the fence, matching the first. I called the non-emergency line and reported suspicious activity. An officer arrived and walked the yard. He told me break-ins often started with testing routines. He suggested better lighting and cameras. He said nothing else had been reported on the street. He left. That evening, I installed a motion light over the back door and set up a small camera inside the living room facing the hallway. I kept the lights off to make the camera useful. I sat upstairs and watched the feed on my phone. Close to midnight, the motion light turned on. The camera showed nothing inside. I watched the back door through the app linked to the light. A figure moved at the edge of the frame. The person stayed low and hugged the wall. The hood hid the face. The person tested the handle again. The deadbolt held. The figure stepped back and stood still, facing the door. Minutes passed. The person turned and moved along the wall toward the side yard. The light turned off. I stayed upstairs and waited. The camera inside caught movement in the hallway. The front door knob turned. I had locked it. The knob turned again, slower. It stopped. The camera feed showed a shadow at the bottom of the stairs. The shadow stayed there. I called the police and stayed on the line. The shadow did not move. I heard a soft scrape at the door. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was. Sirens sounded faint at first, then closer. The shadow pulled back. The front door rattled once hard. Then it stopped. The sirens grew loud. I heard running outside. I stayed upstairs until officers knocked and announced themselves. They searched the house and yard. They found a thin pry mark on the front door frame, fresh and clean. They found gloves near the fence and a small flat bar hidden under leaves. They told me the person likely watched the house and learned when it stood empty. They told me I did the right thing by staying silent and calling. The rest of the week passed without incident. My wife and kids came home. The house felt normal again. I added cameras and replaced the locks. I fixed the gate latch and added a taller light. What stayed with me was the patience of it, the careful testing, the quiet way someone learned my habits while I lived inside my own walls. I still lock the doors early. I still check the lights. When the house makes a sound at night, I do not explain it away. I listen until I understand it. I was alone that night because my roommate left town for a last-minute work trip. The house was small, one floor, built in the early 90s with thin walls and old doors that never closed the same way twice. I had lived there for years and knew every sound it made. That night still felt different before anything happened. It started after midnight. I stayed up later than usual, scrolling on my phone with the TV muted. The lights were off except for a lamp in the corner of the living room. Outside, the street stayed quiet. No cars passed. No dogs barked. The silence felt heavy, like it pressed against the windows. I shut the TV off and stood for a moment, listening. The refrigerator clicked on. The air vent above the hallway hummed. Normal sounds. I locked the front door and the back door, then checked them again out of habit. I went to my bedroom and left the door open like I always did. I lay in bed with the lamp off, phone charging beside me. I did not feel tired. My eyes stayed open, fixed on the dark hallway. The shadows did not move. Everything felt still. Then I heard a sound from the kitchen. It was soft, brief, like something touching the counter and pulling away. I held my breath. The house went quiet again. I told myself it was the fridge settling or something shifting under its own weight. I stayed in bed and waited. Nothing followed. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt stretched. I heard another sound, closer this time. It came from a hallway, low and careful, like fabric brushing against the wall. I sat up slowly and listened. The sound stopped. My ears rang in the silence. I stayed still. I did not check my phone. I did not turn on the light. I waited for another sound. None came. I lay back down, but my body stayed tense. My chest felt tight. My breathing stayed shallow. I focused on the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the paint that I had never noticed before. A minute later, I heard the floor creak near the living room. That sound did not belong to the house settling. It carried weight. It came from the center of the room, not near the walls. Someone or something stood there. I stayed frozen. My mind ran through reasons, excuses, anything that made sense. Maybe the wood reacted to the cold. Maybe pressure shifted. None of it felt right. The creak came again, followed by a slow scrape, like a shoe turning on the floor. I reached for my phone and held it tight. I did not turn on the screen. The glow would give me away if someone stood in the hallway. I listened and counted my breaths. Footsteps followed. Slow, measured, each one spaced apart. They moved from the living room toward the hallway. They stopped just before the bedroom door. I stared into the dark opening where the hallway met my room. I could not see anything, but I felt a presence there. The air felt thicker. My skin prickled. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The steps did not continue. I stayed like that for a long time. My legs cramped. My neck ached. I did not shift. I did not swallow. The silence pressed harder than the noise had. Then the footsteps moved again. They passed my doorway and continued toward the bathroom. The door there creaked open. I heard it, slow and controlled. I heard a faint sound inside, like someone adjusting their stance on tile. Then the door closed. I did not move. My mind felt distant, like I was watching myself from far away. I waited for the steps to come back. They did not. Instead, I heard the back door handle turn. Metal shifted softly. Once. Twice. The lock held. The handle stopped moving. A long pause followed. Then the handle turned again, harder. It stopped. I heard a faint knock against the door, like a body leaning into it. The pressure stayed for several seconds, then released. Footsteps moved away from the door. They crossed the kitchen. They slowed near the counter. I heard a soft clink, like metal touching metal. That sound broke something in me. I unlocked my phone and called emergency services without speaking out loud. I stayed silent and listened as the line connected. I kept my eyes on the doorway. The footsteps moved again, this time toward the front of the house. The front door handle rattled once. It did not open. The steps retreated. I heard a drawer open in the living room, then close. The waiting felt endless. My arms shook. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I stayed still and silent. Eventually, faint sirens reached my ears. They grew louder. The footsteps rushed then, fast, and uneven. The back door banged once as someone shoved it open. Cold air rushed through the house. The door slammed shut again. The siren stopped outside. I stayed in bed until bright lights filled the windows and shadows moved across the walls. Only then did I move. I unlocked my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The house looked wrong in the light. Drawers stood open. The bathroom door hung crooked. The back door frame showed fresh damage where the lock had been forced. Police searched the house and the yard. They found muddy footprints near the fence and a screwdriver dropped behind the trash bin. They said the person likely watched the house and waited until they thought no one was home. They said I stayed quiet long enough to avoid being seen. Later, when the house returned to silence, I walked through each room and took inventory. Nothing major was missing. A wallet left on the counter stayed untouched. A laptop sat where it always did. What they took did not matter. What stayed with me was the time, the patience, the slow movement through rooms I knew by heart. Someone stood in my hallway and listened to me breathe in the dark. I replaced the locks the next day. I installed lights and cameras. I stopped leaving doors open, even inside. I no longer assume silence means safety. When night comes now and I am alone, I listen carefully. I know the difference between a house settling and a step that chooses where to land. I was alone because my parents left for a wedding out of state and my brother stayed with friends. The house felt larger without other people inside it. Every room carried its own pocket of silence. The place sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood where streetlights thinned out near the trees. I had lived there most of my life and thought I understood its habits. That night showed me how wrong that belief was. I spent the evening doing normal things. I reheated leftovers, washed the plate, wiped the counter, and turned off lights as I moved through the house. The weather stayed mild. No wind, no rain. The kind of calm that made sound travel farther than it should. I locked the front door, then the back door, then checked the side door that led into the garage. I told myself I was being careful, not nervous. I went to my room around 11. I left the door open because the hallway light made the room feel less closed in. I scrolled on my phone until my eyes burned. The house stayed quiet, too quiet. Even the usual distant traffic noise seemed gone. Sometime after midnight, I heard a sound that pulled me out of half sleep. It came from downstairs. A single sharp noise like something hitting wood and stopping. I lay still and listened. My heart picked up speed. Nothing followed. I waited until my breathing slowed again. I almost convinced myself it was nothing when I heard it again. This time it sounded like movement, slow and careful, as if weight shifted from one foot to the other. The sound came from the living room. I knew that space well. I could picture the couch, the coffee table, the rug that always bunched at the corner. That sound came from the open area near the window. I stayed in bed and listened harder. The sound stopped. The silence that followed felt intentional, like someone chose it. Minutes passed. I counted them by watching the dim glow of my phone clock without lifting it. At some point, I heard the faintest scrape like rubber against tile. It came from the kitchen. I imagined someone testing their footing, learning where noise carried. I thought about calling someone. I thought about turning on the lights. Both ideas felt wrong. Light would reveal me. Sound would confirm I was there. I stayed still. The hallway floor creaked once. That board always creaked when stepped on near the bathroom. The sound came from that exact spot. Someone stood there long enough for the wood to complain. My mouth went dry. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose. I kept my eyes on the open doorway. The hallway looked darker than it should have. The light switch stayed on, but the shadows pooled deeper. A shape passed through the hall. It blocked the light for a second, then moved on. I did not see details. I saw absence. The light returned weaker than before. Footsteps followed, slow and controlled. They moved toward the stairs. The sound shifted as the person tested each step. I heard the banister creak under a careful grip. The steps stopped halfway up. I realized then that whoever it was knew someone might be home. The movement stayed quiet on purpose. This was not someone who wandered in by mistake. The steps continued. They stopped at the top. The hallway floor creaked again, closer this time. I could tell where the weight settled. I knew that board too. I rolled onto my side without lifting my head. I reached under my bed and wrapped my hand around the metal handle of the flashlight I kept there. I did not turn it on. I held it anyway. The weight of it helped. The footsteps moved past my door. The shape crossed the light again. This time it lingered. The shadow stretched into my room, thin at first, then wider, as if the person leaned forward to look. I kept my eyes half closed. I fixed my breathing into a slow rhythm and let my body go slack. I did not move my hand. I did not tighten my grip. The shadow stayed for a long moment. I felt watched in a way that sank deeper than fear. It felt measured, evaluated. The shadow pulled back. The footsteps moved away. I heard the door to my parents' room open. I heard drawers slide. I heard fabric shift. I lay there and listened to the quiet theft of familiarity. Someone touched things I had grown up with. Someone moved through the house like they belonged there. The sounds drifted back downstairs. The steps on the stairs sounded faster now, less careful. Confidence replaced caution. I heard the garage door leading into the house open. It always stuck halfway. I heard it stick. I heard a pause. Then a firm shove pushed it through. The sound of the garage changed the air in the house. The silence loosened. I heard metal shift. Tools clinked softly. The garage door motor hummed for half a second, then stopped. The power must have been cut earlier. That detail settled everything into place. This was planned. I unlocked my phone and dialed emergency services without making a sound. I stayed on the line and listened. I watched the hallway. Footsteps returned to the kitchen. A cabinet opened. Glass touched glass. The refrigerator opened. Cold air rolled through the house and brushed my face. The light inside the fridge spilled across the floor, then vanished. The back door lock clicked. The door opened. Night air rushed in. I heard the person step outside, then stop. Something made them hesitate. A light flared on outside. The motion sensor above the back door triggered. I had forgotten it existed. The light flooded the kitchen through the window. Footsteps rushed back inside. Panic replaced patience. Drawer slammed. The front door rattled as someone yanked at it. The deadbolt held. Sirens cut through the night, faint at first, then louder. The footsteps bolted toward the back door. The door slammed. The fence rattled. Wood cracked. Then nothing. I stayed where I was until the house filled with light again, this time from outside. Police searched the rooms. They found pry marks on a back door frame and the garage window. They found a bag dropped near the fence with gloves, tape, and a small crowbar. They said the person likely watched the house for days and waited for it to empty. Later, after they left, I walked the house alone. Drawers stayed open. Objects sat where they did not belong. The garage smelled like oil and cold air. The sense of intrusion clung to every wall. Nothing important was gone. What mattered was the quiet movement through my life while I lay still upstairs. Someone knew the sounds of my house well enough to move through it in the dark. Someone knew when to rush and when to wait. My parents came home early. We changed the locks. We fixed the garage window. We added cameras and lights. The house returned to its normal shape. It never returned to its old feeling. I learned the difference between empty and alone. Empty houses echo. Alone, houses listen back.